On December 1st, Russia claimed to have completed the full capture of the city of Pokrovsk. That was a bold-faced lie, told in an attempt to create a false narrative ahead of peace talks with the US. Over a week after that claim was made, fighting still rages on in Pokrovsk, and Ukraine is defending the city as hard as it has at any other point during Vladimir Putin's push into Donetsk. And Ukraine is experiencing far more success than Russia wants you to know about. While Putin and his cronies act as if Pokrovsk has fallen, Ukraine has turned the city into hell on earth. Russia's assault waves are being wiped out over and over as they get tied up in the ditches of death at Pokrovsk. We saw a microcosm of what is really happening in and around Pokrovsk on December 10th. As Euromaidan Press reports, that day saw Russia attempt a mechanized assault against Ukraine's Pokrovsk defenders. Russia clearly thought it had an advantage. In addition to sending the armored vehicles that are typical for these kinds of assaults, poor weather in the Pokrovsk region meant that those vehicles enjoyed some protection from Ukraine's roving first-person view or FPV drones. The foggy and damp conditions limited Ukraine's drone visibility and created muddy conditions that made fighting on the ground more difficult. Russia thought, perhaps even correctly, these conditions were perfect for a surprise assault. Ukraine proved Russia wrong in dramatic fashion. In a Telegram post, the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces, which was one of the Ukrainian units responsible for fending off Russia's December 10th assault, explained what happened next. For the assault, the Russians used armored, automobile, and motorcycle vehicles. The columns tried to break through from the southern direction to the northern part of the city, the 7th Corps explains. Far from being the surprise Russia expected this assault to be, the 7th Corps knew that the assault was coming, and it had backup that helped it stop the Russian forces in their tracks. The 68th Separate Jaeger Brigade, named after Oleksiy Dovbush, destroyed the first box of the Russians. After that, other units, including artillery, began to inflict damage on enemy equipment and personnel. Russia's mechanized assault fell apart before it had the chance to do any real damage to Ukraine's Pokrovsk defenders. Now, the 7th Corps claims the only thing left for those defenders to do is destroy the personnel and enemy equipment that survived the initial counterstrike. Euromaidan Press offers a few more details about Ukraine's victory over Russia's mechanized assault, noting that the very first thing that Ukraine did was disprove the Russian theory that the poor weather conditions made carrying out the assault safer. As the first of Russia's armored vehicles approached, operators from the Jaeger Brigade unleashed an FPV drone that destroyed it where it stood. With that first chunk of Russian armor down, the rest of Ukraine's forces opened fire, using a host of weapons and artillery on the advancing Russian forces. Whatever ground might have been taken that day didn't stay in Russia's hands for long, as the entire assault was destroyed. UKR Inform also reported on Ukraine's December 10th exploits. It shared comments made by the Ukrainian National Guard spokesperson Ruslan Muzychuk, who said, "The weather conditions are currently foggy, especially in the morning and often during daylight hours. Accordingly, we see that the enemy tried to use armored vehicles for an unexpected attack on Pokrovsk, and the fact that they were detected and destroyed in such weather is a great credit to all the defense forces." Muzychuk also dispelled the Russian notion that Pokrovsk has fallen, adding that Ukrainian forces continue to conduct offensive operations in 15 settlements surrounding Pokrovsk, along with defending the city itself. Once again, Russia has pushed hard and gotten nowhere. December 10th saw 234 combat clashes between Russia and Ukraine, with 49 of those clashes happening in the Pokrovsk sector. Though we don't know how many of those clashes Ukraine won versus Russia, we know that the big push into Pokrovsk was a non-starter, and, despite Russia's earlier claims, Pokrovsk still stands. But the mechanized assault on Pokrovsk is just one incident. Other news out of Pokrovsk shows that the destruction of Russia's forces on December 10th wasn't a one-off. It's a part of a pattern of death that is happening throughout Pokrovsk, as Ukraine has transformed many parts of the city and its surrounding regions into terrifying kill zones that are chewing Putin's forces and spitting them back out again, almost as quickly as those forces can organize their assaults. In a separate report, Euromaidan Press says that wave upon wave of Russian offensives have collapsed against Ukraine's Pokrovsk defense, leading to corpses piling up inside anti-tank ditches. The battlefield has settled into a gruesome stalemate, with the Russian command throwing thousands of soldiers to prevent the Ukrainians from taking back more ground, the outlet reports. Wave after wave has turned the battlefield into a death zone, with Russians walking over their own corpses to advance 1 meter. The outlet says that Russia's woes began with its attempts to break through Ukraine's lines in the Dobropilya direction. Located just a handful of miles north of Pokrovsk, the salient that Russia has created toward Dobropilya looked like it was about to succeed in its attempt to break through as recently as early November. That's when trench art columnist David Axe claimed that both the battle for Pokrovsk and Ukraine's attempts to stop the Dobropilya salient were coming to an end. Ukraine's forces were far too stretched, Axe suggested, as the country's reserves had gotten so tied down in Dobropilya that they were unable to aid their comrades in Pokrovsk. All signs seemed to point toward Axe being right at the time. However, the Dobropilya salient hasn't provided any real success for Russia, and the Pokrovsk defenders are still fighting a month after Axe made those comments. Now, Euromaidan press claims Russia's forces have shifted from attempting to break through into Dobropilya to simply holding the northern line they've created at any cost. And that cost is the same one that Russia has paid in abundance since the start of Putin's invasion: bodies. The Russian command keeps feeding the battlefield with hundreds of men every day to prevent Ukraine from reclaiming terrain, while the Ukrainians must continue suppressing these waves, Euromaidan press reports. Russia's goal is to overwhelm Ukraine's defenses, both near Dobropilya and in Pokrovsk, with manpower. If it can do that, Russia believes it will be able to re-establish the Dobropilya salient that seemed like such a sure thing a month ago, which in turn reopens the possibility of completely encircling Pokrovsk. Ukraine holding firm against Putin's strategy of throwing bodies at the Pokrovsk problem means that its forces in the cities can continue their defense without getting surrounded. It also means that Putin has to sacrifice yet more to a campaign for Pokrovsk, to which he has already dedicated so much. Ukraine's ability to defend Pokrovsk is extremely impressive. The Independent reports that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that Russia has deployed 170,000 troops in the Pokrovsk direction, which is a substantial portion of the 700,000 soldiers that Russia has operating inside Ukraine. This sheer wealth of manpower places Ukraine at a disadvantage in many regions in and around Pokrovsk, where Russia outnumbers Ukraine 8 soldiers to 1 in some areas of the region's front. Yet it's a disadvantage that Ukraine continues to overcome, and Putin is finding out that having more soldiers doesn't guarantee victory, and certainly not at the pace that Russia's leader expects. We've already discussed the failure of Russia's December 10th mechanized assault in Pokrovsk. However, Euromaidan press says that footage captured by a Ukrainian drone in the ruins of a settlement named Volodymyrivka reveals another layer to the Russian failure to take Pokrovsk. Russia announced the capture of that village back in August, though it's clear that Volodymyrivka is far from as secure as Putin needs it to be for it to be used as part of Russia's assaults on nearby Pokrovsk. The drone that Euromaidan press talks about captured footage of a pair of Russian soldiers attempting to advance through the collapsed ruins of buildings in a village they were supposed to be holding. The drone tracks the soldiers as they clamber over bricks and wood. Little do those soldiers know that they're walking into an ambush. A lone Ukrainian paratrooper lies in wait in the rubble. Once Russia's soldiers are close enough, he reveals himself and opens fire. Though the Russian soldiers manage to scramble away to take cover behind the remains of a wall, the paratrooper pursues. Moving through the debris as he follows instructions from Ukraine's drone reconnaissance team, he's able to get the drop on the Russian soldiers. Within seconds, one of those soldiers is taken down, followed by the second soldier, who Euromaidan press claims was the commander of an assault group in the village. Scenes like this play out dozens of times per day, rapid, deadly local engagements where small Ukrainian teams, outnumbered but coordinated with drones, neutralize Russian infiltrators before they can mass into a threat, Euromaidan press says. That may be the perfect summation of the Ukraine war as a whole. Russia attempts to break Ukraine's defenses using sheer brute force. Ukraine, being the more tactically adept and precise of the two, responds with far more controlled attacks that get much better results. The meat grinder that Putin has created is being fed so well because of this difference in strategy. Ukraine may be outnumbered 8 soldiers to 1 in some areas of Pokrovsk, but it's inflicting so many casualties on Russia that this numerical advantage doesn't count anywhere near as much as it should. Still, Putin and his commanders can't come up with any new ideas. For the Russian attackers, the advance toward Pokrovsk has turned into a march through what soldiers now call the ditches of death, Euromaidan press claims. It also says that drone footage captured by the Birds of Magyar, which is one of Ukraine's elite drone units, highlights the scale of loss that Russia is experiencing in its assaults on a city that Putin claims has already been captured. One video shows a 200 square meter or 2,150 square foot portion of the Pokrovsk region that is close to an anti-tank trench. In that small patch of land alone, over 30 corpses of Russian soldiers are visible. In other areas of the city, Russia's losses are so extensive that up to 20 bodies can be seen lying in areas as small as 10 square meters, or 107 square feet. Russia's soldiers are caught in an endless cycle in the Pokrovsk sector. Ukraine's kill zones aren't dissuading Putin's commanders from ordering those soldiers to attack. Often a small unit of Russia's soldiers will enter one of those kill zones, which are patrolled constantly by FPV drones and get shredded to pieces. Ukraine never assumes that the job is done after a single engagement. Its reconnaissance teams continue watching the same kill zones because they know that the Russian forces never learn. Inevitably, another unit stumbles into the same kill zone and the macabre scene plays out again. Euromaidan press reports on footage capturing this precise cycle in action. At the end, the ditch is clogged with corpses, smashed motorcycles and burning debris, but Russians continue their efforts, the outlet says of one video. A wounded Russian tries to crawl over the dead to escape, while the perspective switches to a Ukrainian FPV drone closing in as the wounded Russian scavenges gear and speaks to another injured soldier deeper in the trench. The drone strikes, throwing him back into the mass of bodies. Ukraine is showing no mercy to Russia's Pokrovsk assaulters. It can't afford to. Ukraine wants to cause as much damage as it can to Russia as it attempts to hold the city. As the corpses pile high, the Russian soldiers who follow their unfortunate comrades are being forced to march through and over the bodies. That alone must be a sight so chilling that it would demoralize even the most experienced soldier. Knowing that they can't stop, Russia's soldiers continue to march, hoping, in vain, that Ukraine's drones don't find them. Sometimes, Euromaidan press says, these constant waves of humanity even make a little progress, but it never takes long for FPV and bomber drones to reverse the Russian gains, adding more bodies to the ever-growing Pokrovsk pile in the process. This is what the supposed capture of Pokrovsk really looks like. Putin is celebrating a victory that hasn't happened as hundreds of his soldiers fight for the city. Even if he is aware of what is really happening in Pokrovsk, Putin may at least believe that each dead Russian soldier at least buys him a slight advance deeper into the city. However, that doesn't seem to be the case either. In recent days, Ukraine's fearsome defense of Pokrovsk has been changing. It still has its kill zones, and the Russian assaults are being repelled, as we saw on December 10th. But inside Pokrovsk itself, Ukraine has started to flip the script. What once seemed to be the inevitable fall of Pokrovsk is now looking far less certain. Ukraine's forces are making advances where none seemed possible. On December 11th, United 24 media reported that Ukraine made a point that Putin didn't want anybody to see. Assault troops from Ukraine's Scalia regiment raised their country's flag right in the center of Pokrovsk, instantly destroying the last vestiges of credibility that may have been left in Putin's claims that Pokrovsk had fallen to Russia. Footage of the event was published by the same 7th Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces that reported on the destruction of Russia's mechanized assault, along with a caption that read, "Stormtroopers of the Scalia regiment raised the Ukrainian flag in the center of Pokrovsk. Despite the Kremlin's lies about the city being taken, Ukraine is fighting, will fight, and will not give up its territory to the occupiers." Putin's propagandists have just received a gunshot, and they have no way to react. With one video, Ukraine has disproved every notion that Pokrovsk has fallen. Its soldiers are still fighting in the city and have reclaimed a city center that may have once been in Russia's hands. The only way that it could have happened is if Ukraine launched an assault against a Russian force that was defending the territory it had claimed. Ukraine is no longer on the defensive in Pokrovsk. It's making gains. How long that will continue remains to be seen. There is now a gruesome stalemate in the city that is seeing Russia churn through the troops that Putin dedicated to taking Pokrovsk. If that situation stays as it is, more Russian soldiers will die. The more dead Russian soldiers, the weaker Russia's future offensives in and around Pokrovsk become. But perhaps more importantly for Ukraine, every failed Russian assault means that commanders have to pull soldiers from regions of Pokrovsk that Russia currently occupies. Those occupied areas weaken just as much as the strength of the Russian assaults. That's where the opportunities lie for Ukraine. The kill zones and ditches of death it's created may soon attrit Russia to the point where Ukraine can retake more than the center of a city that Russia claims to have captured. As for Russia, it's clear that Putin has no plan B. Putin's Pokrovsk campaign is starting to go sideways, and the only response that Russia's leader has is to throw yet more soldiers at the problem. It's a campaign that has already cost Russia dearly, as both the Moscow Times and the UK government have pointed out. The former highlights some of the grim statistics that demonstrate how well Ukraine has done to turn Pokrovsk into a hellscape for Russia's occupying forces. Citing a Russian Telegram channel named Shot, the outlet says that Ukraine has lost a little over 6,500 soldiers in Pokrovsk as of November. Shot doesn't name a source, however the channel is a Russian military blog, so it has a vested interest in making Ukraine's fate in Pokrovsk seem as bad as possible. If the best that Telegram channel can do is claim 6,500 deaths for Ukraine, it has inadvertently proven that Putin's Pokrovsk strategy has been a catastrophic failure. Why? Well, in October alone, the Moscow Times says Ukraine killed 25,000 Russian soldiers, most of whom were involved in Russia's assaults on Pokrovsk. The UK government expands on these figures via a speech delivered by Neil Holland of the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. It's taken over a year for Russia to advance 15 kilometers toward Pokrovsk, suffering nearly 100,000 casualties in doing so, Holland said on November 12th. We said earlier that Russia outnumbers Ukraine 8-1 in the Pokrovsk region. That no longer seems like such an important figure if Ukraine is causing over 10 Russian casualties for every one of its soldiers. Still, volume remains the only strategy that Putin has. As Euromaidan Press concludes, overall the Russian strategy here is volume by keeping the human conveyor belt moving forward. For now, this grim arithmetic keeps the line static, but with casualty rates in this sector reaching levels unseen elsewhere on the front, the question is whether Russia will be able to sustain this for long. That is the question indeed. Putin may yet take Pokrovsk, though it seems increasingly likely that he will have to wait until 2026 to do so. But if that city falls, and it's still a very big if, he may have expended so much of Russia's forces on the taking of Pokrovsk that the deeper push into Donetsk that has to follow will fail completely. Russia still hasn't taken Pokrovsk. Its soldiers are dying in record numbers thanks to Ukraine's brilliant tactics. If those exhausted Russian forces eventually succeed, all that awaits them is yet more death in the rest of the Donetsk fortress belt. More than a few of Russia's soldiers have figured this out already, and they're not happy about it. Russia's military is now rife with troops who are faking injuries to get out of being rotated to Pokrovsk, as well as soldiers who are actively disobeying their orders. Find out about Putin's people problems, along with the major issue that is tearing Russia apart from the inside, in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more updates on what is happening in the Pokrovsk direction. And thank you for watching.